demanding to be relocated to other countries. But on Wednesday, after an eviction order, the police moved in. They fired water cannons and stun grenades. Police say they arrested some 100 foreign nationals who refused to disperse. For the protesters, the use of force by the police is fueling anger over what they call a xenophobic atmosphere in South Africa.
They're shooting for gun. No one is animal. If us we are not welcome, they must tell us, they must talk to our government. We are not animal.
We are foreigner, exactly, but we are not foreigner because we are African, all of us. They don't want to even give us access because we are not African. We are foreigner. Can you imagine? Can you imagine? They forget from the period of apartheid.
Many migrants from other African countries go to South Africa seeking better job prospects. But after a spate of deadly riots and attacks in September, many say they no longer feel safe here. That's why these protesters in Cape Town have been calling on the UN to move them to another country. Last week, the UN Refugee Agency issued a statement saying false messages were being circulated about resettlement and that only a very small number of refugees and asylum seekers met the criteria. But that didn't stop the protests here. After Wednesday's police operation, remaining demonstrators headed on. For now, their new home is a local church, where they've been given temporary shelter.
South Africa's decision to arrest Kenyan nationals working at a US-linked refugee processing center sent shockwaves far beyond Johannesburg. What initially appeared to be a routine immigration enforcement operation quickly escalated into a sensitive diplomatic issue involving three governments, global refugee politics, and questions about sovereignty, legality, and foreign influence on African soil. The arrests took place after South Africa's Department of Home Affairs launched an intelligence-led investigation into the operations of a refugee application center connected to a United States resettlement program. Authorities concluded that several foreign nationals were employed at the facility while holding tourist visas, a direct violation of South African immigration law. The individuals arrested were Kenyan citizens who had entered the country legally but were not authorized to work. South African officials moved swiftly. Immigration officers raided the premises, detained the workers, and later issued deportation orders along with multi-year entry bans. The government emphasized that the enforcement action was lawful, procedural, and consistent with national regulations. No U.S. diplomats were arrested, and the facility itself was not classified as a diplomatic mission. Despite these clarifications, the political impact was immediate. Washington reacted with concern. U.S. officials expressed discomfort over what they described as interference in a refugee processing operation tied to American resettlement efforts. While the U.S. stopped short of accusing South Africa of violating international law, the message was clear. The issue had moved beyond visas and into diplomatic territory. Kenya also entered the conversation. Nairobi sought explanations for the detention and deportation of its citizens, requesting assurances that due process had been followed. South Africa maintained that Kenyan authorities had been informed and that the workers themselves were aware their employment applications had previously been denied. At the center of the controversy lies a deeper issue: who controls refugee operations conducted within sovereign African states? South Africa has long been a hub for international humanitarian and refugee-related programs. Its infrastructure, financial systems, and transport networks make it attractive for global agencies and foreign governments operating resettlement initiatives. Over time, however, concerns have grown within South Africa about oversight, compliance, and the extent to which foreign-backed programs operate independently of national regulations. Officials stressed that no country, regardless of its global power, is exempt from local law. The message was direct: refugee work does not grant immunity from immigration requirements. Public reaction within South Africa was mixed but intense. Many citizens applauded the enforcement action, viewing it as a rare example of the government asserting control over foreign-linked operations. On social media, the arrests were framed as a sovereignty issue rather than an immigration matter. Supporters argued that allowing unauthorized foreign workers undermines local employment and weakens state authority. Critics, however, warned of diplomatic fallout. They argued that South Africa risks damaging relations with key partners by appearing hostile to humanitarian initiatives. Others questioned why enforcement actions were taken against workers rather than the institutions employing them. The situation also exposed the complexity of modern refugee systems. Many resettlement programs operate through layered arrangements involving contractors, NGOs, foreign governments, and local partners. Responsibility is often diffused, making accountability difficult. In this case, South Africa made it clear that accountability begins with compliance on its territory. The United States refugee program involved has already been controversial, with debates over selection criteria and processing locations. The arrests added another layer of scrutiny, raising questions about transparency and governance. South Africa's stance forced a broader conversation about how international refugee operations interact with national laws in host countries. Diplomatic channels were activated quickly. South Africa's Department of International Relations and Cooperation confirmed consultations with both Washington and Nairobi. The tone was described as firm but constructive. Pretoria reiterated that the matter was administrative, not political, yet refused to reverse its actions. This firmness resonated across Africa. Several analysts noted that African governments have increasingly pushed back against what they perceive as unequal treatment in international arrangements. From trade to security to humanitarian work, the demand for respect of sovereignty has grown louder. The arrests also highlighted the evolving relationship between South Africa and the United States. While the two countries maintain significant economic and political ties, recent years have seen friction over foreign policy alignment, global conflicts, and strategic partnerships. This incident, though limited in scope, fed into a narrative of recalibration. Kenya's response remained measured. Officials acknowledged the visa violations but emphasized the need for clearer frameworks governing cross-border humanitarian work. The episode sparked discussion within East Africa about employment opportunities, migration pathways, and regulatory clarity for international programs operating regionally. Beyond diplomacy, the human dimension remains significant. Refugee applicants relying on the processing center faced uncertainty. Operations were temporarily disrupted as authorities reviewed compliance procedures. South Africa assured that legitimate applicants would not be penalized for administrative failures by program operators. International observers noted that this case could set a precedent. If more African countries enforce immigration laws strictly against foreign-linked humanitarian programs, global agencies may need to rethink how they structure operations on the continent. Compliance costs could rise, but transparency and local integration may improve. For South Africa, the message was unmistakable. The rule of law applies uniformly, sovereignty is non-negotiable. Partnerships are welcome, but only within legal frameworks. The story also reflects a broader shift in Africa's posture on the global stage. African states are no longer content to be passive hosts to international initiatives. They are asserting terms, demanding accountability, and redefining engagement. As diplomatic discussions continue, the long-term outcome remains uncertain. What is clear is that a routine enforcement action has become a symbol of a changing world order, one where African governments are increasingly willing to draw firm lines. South Africa did not merely arrest a group of workers. It made a statement, and the world noticed.
You've been watching Echoes of Africa, where every story carries the sound of tomorrow. If this moved you, subscribe now, like, and share so Africa's voice never fades into silence.